Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I'm your host Sean Lavery, and just coming back to you guys tonight with a kind of different episode. Susie is running around this weekend. I'm hoping she might stop in, but if not, we wish her good luck, and we'll hear from her next week on the next show. But tonight, I'm pleased to welcome another member of the PNF family. Mr. Big Daddy John Rapp from the Rusted Hook podcast. Welcome to the new show again, John.
Thanks, brother.
Now,
Glad to
how's
be
it going?
glad to be here. Doing well. Beautiful Sunday afternoon here in the great
Absolutely.
state of West Virginia, brother. Just a
Uh,
little few hours south of you.
yeah. How many do you got any plans for Labor Day tomorrow?
I'll probably go fishing. Beth has to work.
Ah, well, there you go. There you go. That sounds like good enough plans to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I figured I would hop on and with you, and I know I have some exciting news. I finally got my first big, or well, any kind of kayak tournament win. I've been pretty close a couple of times, but finally on Saturday I was able to pull off a first place finish. So um, wanted to chat a little bit about that, but anything else going on in your neck of the woods?
No, man. No, man. So I'll play interview for you here, brother. So you fished the Susquehanna. You fished a
Correct.
tournament with the kayak anglers of Pennsylvania. Your chapter up there.
Yep, my
So
fellow kayak anglers of Central PA. It's the chapter that I'm the one of the co-directors for. So, and it's the one event that's in my backyard. So if there is an event I should do well in, it's probably this one.
so you had the hometown advantage. You took full advantage of it.
I did,
So
I
tell
did,
so
and
tell us so tell us about your setup, what you took out on the water, and what you started with, and how you finished.
yeah, that's a definitely some good questions. I went out with a bunch of stuff. You know, if anybody's ever fished with me, they know I take pretty much everything in the kitchen sink. And I had pre-fished a little bit the Thursday before I went out, caught a lot of smaller bass, and basically using the Ned rig. We had the water level had jumped Thursday and Friday due to some storms some further north on the Susquehanna. So the levels had jumped from basically 25,000 cubic feet per minute up to 45,000, which still isn't as fast. It's still paddleable, but it definitely changes the river for sure. And and I basically so I pre-fished the rise because that's usually when it's really good, and I did pretty well on the Ned rig, and I also did really well on a jackhammer, the Golden Shiner jackhammer. When I put in for practice at the ramp, a gentleman had mentioned, "Hey, I was up by the bridge throwing, the Golden Shiner jackhammer and did okay." So in practice, I actually went up and caught a few on that. Again, my biggest fish in practice was only 15 inches though, so I had a lot of dinks again.
So
But
okay, so we know you were throwing those two type of baits. Tell us about your setups. Were you throwing bait casters, heavy mediums? What are your line and your pole right your rods types?
so on my Ned rig, I throw on spinning gear. I usually throw it. I have a St. Croix Mojo yak rod. I like the Mojo or the
Yeah,
yak rods because the butts are a little bit shorter, and I
right.
don't feel like it's always hitting me in my side when I cast and stuff. So and that's a I think like a 7 foot medium light ultra fast tip. I really like that for the Ned rig because it really lets you just pick up anytime anything even nibbles on that. You
Have
can
the
feel
same
it.
rods.
Okay, gotcha.
I know
And
exactly where you come from.
so that's my Ned rig rod, and I'm actually talking to Brian about replacing that rod with a Douglas version of that because I actually broke the tip off of it earlier in the season from the top eyelet down to the first one. I ended up or the next eyelet, and I ended up just cutting it right at that. So
Right.
basically, turned that second eyelet into the top eyelet, and I've been using it like that. I kind of filed off the tip just so it wouldn't cut my line or anything, and I've been using it like that pretty much all season because I'm still waiting for that order to get put in for that. And because I'd used, that's the rod I actually lost last year of Brian's down at
Yeah.
Dale Hollow.
Uh,
So
yeah.
and
And that's another story.
yeah, yeah, my anybody who's listened to the our show has heard that story a lot, but um, so, but I loved that rod so much last year that I told him this year when I broke the tip off my St. Croix that I was going to replace it with that. And, he's been busy with, everything that he's got going on too.
Yeah.
And so I just have been fishing with it and it's working okay. But I still hope to replace that with the Douglas one at some point. But like I said, so that was what I was throwing my Ned rig on. And I use there's a local Ned head maker by me who does the EWG Ned rig heads. So I was throwing an 1/8 ounce. Actually, no, it was a 16th ounce Ned rig head because when if the flow gets heavier, I'll throw a 1/8 ounce just because it gets me down a little easier. Sometimes the 16th ounce will just get blown away if the flow is too
Yeah.
fast. But it was
Six,
or
six,
one.
eight, 6, 8, 10 pound test line.
I usually use 10, and we had that conversation in the paddle and fin host chat, and I think I was by far the heaviest line that people, or when I said 10, but I use Invisex 10 and don't have any problems with it. So for the most part, I do carry a couple of different lower lines. I carry some FC Sniper in like 7 that I bought for drop shotting and a few other like super finesse techniques that if I feel like the fish are being line shy, that's what I'll tie on.
Right.
But for the most part, I use Seagar and Vizex just 10 pound. I have a big spool of it that's always in the cubby in my kayak. So that's generally what I use for most of my leader material on my spinning rods, and
Gotcha.
it seems to do okay. So, and the chatterbait rod I was throwing is a Mojo Glass. It's the green rod from St. Croix,
Mhm.
and I initially had bought that rod for crankbaits because it's a medium and medium action. So I thought it would have like the parabolic bend. Like I had a Cast King uh, crankbait rod that I lost, and now I have a Shimano crankbait rod that I use for mainly for my crankbaits. But the Mojo glass rod does not have that bend to it as much. It's
Yeah.
it's
It's a little
stiffer than
stiff. Mhm.
it's stiffer than I thought it would be, but it does work really really well for jackhammers and crank or and chatterbaits. I've found like it doesn't it it doesn't have that bend as much, but I don't feel like I need that without it since it's not a treble hook bait.
Right.
And so that allows me to still throw my Shimano with crankbaits on it and also still have something tied on, a jackhammer tied on if I want to, on that other rod. So that was the rod I was throwing the jackhammer on.
I got you.
So that's what I threw in practice. Now, when I went out on tournament day, I went out. I initially was throwing. I started at first thing in the morning throwing a whopper plopper while it was real early, just to see if any top water action would happen, and didn't get a sniff on the whopper plopper at all. So I had that tied on. I had the Ned rig tied on. I had on the jackhammer. I initially, or on the glass, I initially had the whopper plopper tied on that, but after that didn't work, I tied on the jackhammer on that.
So
And
so when you go out, do you just carry 2 rods, or do you have 3 or 4 or 5
I
rods
had
set up?
7. I
7.
had
Okay.
7. Yep. So I had the Ned rig rod. I had a crankbait on the Shimano rod. I had the whopper plopper initially on the glass rod. I switched that out quickly for the jackhammer. I had if you ever watch Jeff Little, he just did a show or an episode on. He called it better than a jig. It's a 3/8 ounce bullet style head that has a band around it, so it almost has like a jig skirt on it. And then he puts a little bead in front of that, and then below that, just a very small flipping hook, like a 1/0 or 2/0 flipping hook. And then he puts bat wings a a Z-Man bat wings on the bottom of it, and then he pegs it. There's a peg at the top to keep it all together, and he calls it better than a jig. He said it's like a jig, and you work it like a jig. But he said it doesn't get hung up as much in the rocky stuff like the Susquehanna is. And so I had tied that on. I had never thrown it. I didn't have I had the smaller bat wings for that presentation. You need the bigger bat wings. And I didn't have that, so I ended up throwing the mini goats on there because it still had two tails on it. Didn't quite have the big flappers that the bat wings have, but I figured I'd give it a try. So I had that tied on. I did have a tube tied on right away because I have an old 6 gill fishing rod that I always throw my tubes on, that's part of the story too. Later, a little bit later, when I actually got to throwing the tube, and trying to think what else I had on those other two rods. I know I went out with 7, so I'm just drawing a blank. They're
Square
both
bill.
not well. That was that was on my crankbait rod. Yep. So I had that on. Oh, a swim bait. I had a swim bait on, and that I have on had on a St. Croix Legend. And what's the new St. Croix rod? That one that just came out last year? I can't remember what that's called.
I'm just stuck on the glass rods right now with those guys.
Okay. Okay.
The
Well,
guy.
and I had bought that one, and that the not quite a jig I had on that new St. Croix rod that came out last year. I'm drawing a blank on that series, but so basically I started with the crankbait uh, early on in the tournament because I usually where I put out of I usually float down to my first spot, but I'll hit all around while I'm getting down there. I knew I had all day to get down to that spot. A friend of mine had fished from his boat the night before and told me that the crankbait was working for him way downriver. So that was kind of where my target area was. But I knew it would take me probably at least the first 2 hours to float the whole way down there. If I did, if I were, picked apart, everything, wait to
Yeah,
get down there.
hit the. Yep.
So that's usually what I do, and so I decided to do that. There was a guy who met me at the ramp, and he hightailed it out of there. He was going downriver too. I don't know. There's a rocky section I think is where he went to, and I usually do okay there as well. But he hightailed it down there, and I told him I was like, I'm not even gonna launch early. I'm gonna launch right when at 6 a.m. You could be on the water at 5:30, but you couldn't wet your line till 6.
Right.
And so a lot of people, hit the water at 5:30 and just start, heading to their first spot. But I generally don't do that. I usually just launch at 6 and then, work my way down because I always like to not skip over areas that might be holding fish and that sometimes helps me figure out where they are. If then by the time I get down to the spot where I'm pretty sure that I know they will be, maybe I can start using those to cull some of the
Upgrade.
littler ones. Yeah.
Yep. So by the time you got down there, did you have your 5 fish?
I did not. So because everything I was catching was tiny. I started off the day with a bluegill on a Ned rig, and then I caught probably I'd say 5 or 6 all bass or smallmouth that were all below 12 inches. They were like 10, 11, just nothing would break that 12-inch mark.
So what color were you using? The PB&J, or what was your
On my
color
Ned
for
rig, I use hot
yeah.
snakes.
Hot snakes?
Yep, hot snakes is my go-to color on the Susquehanna. At least the part that I fish, it seems to be out of all the colors I've tried. I mean, yoga pants sometimes works pretty good for me.
Yeah.
And PB&J, mud minnow, all those do okay, but for some reason, hot snakes, and I actually throw the ticklers, the hot snakes ticklers, with just the
Okay.
4 little tiny little
Yeah,
appendages on the end.
right. It's almost like a tube hybrid. So.
Kind of, yep. So like I said, I caught all those bass. I made it partially down to the rocks where that other gentleman that launched with me was fishing, and I remember commenting to him that I'd caught a lot of dinks, and he's like, "Yeah, I haven't caught much of anything." and that kind of surprised me because he went right to the rocks, and usually the rocks, the area that he's fishing is a good spot because even though it can be slow above and below it, just with the rocks there, the current kind of has to work through it, so it speeds it up a little bit. Plus, it gets all that oxygenated water that the smallies
Right.
love.
Right.
So usually that's a pretty good spot. And so I was surprised when I didn't really get anything. I had one fish that was pretty nice bite, but got off pretty quick. I never got to see how big it was, but it probably would have at least been measurable for sure. While I was down in the rocks, I did catch a catfish on the Ned rig, of all things. I
Mm-hmm.
thought, man, finally, here's the first fish. This one's going to be measurable. And then I was like, wait, it's not coming up. I bet you it's a catfish. And sure enough, it was probably like a 22-inch catfish.
Ah,
So got my line all snotty. You know how you get that
yeah,
catfish
yeah.
snot up on your line, but got me excited anyway. And so then I kind of I was like, well, I'm down here at the rocks. It's probably another good 20 minutes of paddling straight down if I went down to the area where the guy told me he was catching this crankbait fish. So I was like, well, you know what? I still got time. I think it was like 8:30 by that point. So I'd been fishing for maybe 2.5 hours. Still didn't have a fish on the board, and so I picked up the crankbait and I was like, I'm just going to work my way down there. Right after the rocky section that I usually stop at, it gets a little bit deeper. It switches from like 5-6 foot average to 10 foot, and
Okay.
so I usually don't like that section as much because unless you tie on like a DT6 to or DT10, you're not going to be cranking that as well. But it was funny. Almost the first or second cast, once I threw the crankbait, I actually caught my first measurable fish, which was an 18, and it hit
Oh,
it as soon as it hit the water, almost like a topwater bite. Like I
right.
cast out the crankbait, I didn't even get the bail or the rod closed to start winding it, and it was on. And
Yeah.
so I was like, okay, well, 18-inch for my first fish wasn't bad. I was happy. Um, so then I worked my way floating down through that area, through the deeper area. There is a spot where, as you get closer to the shore, it does get more in the 6 to 10 foot range. So I was trying to keep over that way, but I passed a few boats that were also in that area, and definitely wasn't the same as that my buddy was describing. And he was telling me like just running a square bill, he was even over because he was running the square bill in that same area, but so it couldn't have been getting down more than 6 feet, even though it's
Mm-hmm.
10 foot deep. So they must have been at least somewhat suspended in that area when
Right.
he was catching them. I did manage to catch like a 14 and a half, and I think 15. I threw the crankbait for a while, but I was pulling up a ton of grass with that. Like almost every cast, it was coming back with grass just floating. It wasn't coming off the bottom; it was just floating in the water all over the place. I don't know if boats had churned it all up or what, but so I switched a little bit when I finally got the whole way down to where I knew exactly where he was. I switched to that not quite a jig, and I did catch a 15-inch on that. So that was my third measurable fish. And let's see. So at that point, I spent a lot of time. I probably spent from maybe, it probably took me till like 9 to get down there. And I probably spent a good 2 hours down in that section, just crankbaiting around, dragging that not quite a jig around, just trying to see where they were. And I picked up a few fish. I think I had 12 and a half, 13. So I got my limit probably about by 10 o'clock. I had my five fish, but I didn't even look at the standings because I knew all my fish were pretty little at that point, except for the 18. And I kind of guessed that that definitely wasn't going to be enough to do well. So I once I was down there, I was like, wow, it's going to be paddling upstream to get back up to where I launched. So I might as well get started, and I kind of skipped over that deeper section, and then fished the rocks a little heavier when I got back up there. And I think I picked up one or two more on in the rocks there, but there I was still catching a ton of dinks. For every like one measurable fish, I probably had to go through like 15, 20 dinks. And I
Dang.
was so
So what was your total count for the day if you was to guesstimate?
oh if I looked at all my fish, because I do take a picture of every fish I catch just so I can go back and look. And when I went back and looked, I think I had 31, not counting the Ned rig and the catfish, or the bluegill rather. So
Right. That's a good
so
day.
it was, and I mean, they were. If I bet you I could have caught 50 of those tiny ones if I would have stayed down in the rocks just throwing the Ned rig, because again, the river at that point is a mile wide, and so the rocks go pretty much the whole way across the river. So if I usually only fish the first from my shoreline, the west shoreline, the west bank. I usually only fish the rocks out about you know a quarter of a mile before I turn around and start heading back up. And there's still another 3/4 of a mile of rocks. So if I would have picked apart every one of those rocks, they might have been some big ones in there, but I just wasn't finding them there.
Right.
So um, at that point, I think I was like, I got to throw something bigger. I need something weedless because I was still pulling up grass with every crankbait I threw. And I threw the jackhammer some, but it wasn't the same area that I was catching them in practice because the flow just wasn't the same. And so it just that wasn't really working for me. So I was like, I need to throw something that's weedless, that's still going to flow naturally with the flow that is there. I definitely had to find flowing water because they weren't in anything that wasn't moving hardly. It had to have some flow to it. Um, and that's what I was like, you know what? I haven't thrown the tube much yet this morning. There's one creek mouth that I always have luck with the tube that I usually throw it. But when I got down there, that was like one of the first places I stopped. It was like 6:15, and there was a dude standing right on the point of that creek mouth, casting right across the creek channel. And I was like, guess I'm not going in there. And I was like, what's that guy doing out here at 6 in the morning?
Yeah.
But he was pulling him in too. I saw him as I went past. I saw him catch at least two. I don't know how big they were, but I could tell it was still pretty dark. We did lines in at 6, and sunrise was not till 6:30. So first light was probably right around 6:14. And so I couldn't really see what he caught, but I knew I could hear the splashing and the commotion, so I knew he was catching something. But I also knew then I couldn't fish that creek now, which was kind of a
Right.
bummer. But so that's usually where I threw the tube. So the tube was just hanging out on that rod in the back on the back of my crate, and it wasn't until probably like 10:30, 11 when I was like, I gotta do something to start finding bigger fish because these dinks are killing me and they're not going to help me. So I was like, you know what? I'll give the tube a try because that'll flow kind of like the Ned rig flows. It'll naturally bump along the bottom, still let me cover a little bit of water, not like dead sticking something. Because
Right.
I just don't do well with completely dead sticking something. I always feel like it has to be moving or I'm just not covering enough water. And when the river's a mile wide, you almost gotta cover some water, just because there's so much water there. But so I tied on the tube, and almost immediately I started catching bigger fish. I got like another 14, and I started calling off those smaller ones at the bottom of my thing, at the bottom of my list. And I caught a 14, I caught a 15. So then at that point I had an 18, a 15, like two 14s and a 13, I think. And at that point I was kind of working my way back upriver, and still wasn't. Couldn't quite get those. The huge fish that I was really looking for, and I'd talked to a buddy in practice that caught 220s, 218s, crazy numbers of fish, and I knew I had a pretty good feeling that what I had wasn't going to be great. So finally, I think it was probably 1 o'clock. So lines out was 2, and I worked my way back up the river to I was just about where I put in at 1 o'clock, and I kind of caught up with another one of my buddies who was paddling right in that same area. I paddled over to him, and we were chatting, and he's like, "Yeah, I he would I he." I was like, I didn't even look at the scoreboard. He's like, well, I just looked, and you're in seventh, and I'm one spot below you. I was like, okay. He's like, and it's 1 o'clock. Usually, they really shut off at that point. because you're kind of, right in the middle of the sun's directly overhead, and just sometimes gets to be tough fishing. And we were right back. He's like, I'm just going to go paddle and get out. And because he launched kind of the same place I did. And so I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just go out too. I was tournament directing, and I knew I had to get back to the. I wanted to be at the wards early so I could set up my tent and my table and all that fun stuff. But I was thinking to myself, I was like, you know what? I went downriver all day, and there's a spot just north of where I launched that last year where I caught my 20-inch, my biggest fish in that area. And I was like, I got a whole hour. It's probably about a 20-minute paddle up there. That'll give me some time to fish that area, and I can just finish out up there. We'll see. I went and looked, and I was surprised the leaderboard really wasn't, as crazy as I thought it would be. I thought for sure, there would be people at least approaching 90, and I was like, well, I'm in sixth. Let's just see if I can go and at least try and get in the money. And so I paddled up to that spot. On my way up there, I caught another 14 and like 3/4 or something that jumped me one spot, I think from seventh to sixth. And I was like, okay, the tube's working up here too. And it took me probably until 1:40 to get up to the spot that I caught that 20-inch last year. And first cast in that spot, 19 3/4.
Gotta love it.
Oh, it was huge. And I was so pumped. As soon as I felt it hit that tube, man, it took off running. I was like, oh, this got some size to it. And I was like, yeah, what if it's that 20 from last year still in that same area? Because I released it there, and actually later that year, I took a buddy of mine up there, and he caught a 21 out of that same exact spot. So it just holds big fish.
Right.
And so I pulled it in, measured it, and I was like, oh, 19 3/4. That's I didn't even look at big bass at that point because I was like, somebody's got to have a 20. All the 20s kind of swimming around in that river. It was still a big section of the river to fish, so I didn't even look at that. And I was like, oh well, it's. I did finally look at the standings, and that jumped me from sixth to first. And so we probably had 15 minutes to fish at that point. So I'm like, well, heck, I'm in first. I might as well just keep fishing and see if I can bump any of my other. I think my lowest fish at that point was like 14 and a half, 14 and 3/4.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, if I can get one more, that might be good. I ended up not catching anything bigger than a 14. I think I caught two more in that 15 minutes, but they were both 12 or smaller. And I was like, well, all right, well, lines out's at 2. When lines out hit, I was winning. But we also have in our tournaments, we usually do from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. You can still submit fish.
Right.
Yep. And a lot of people do that. I was kind of surprised, even the area that I was fishing in the morning when I floated way downriver. Normally I have signal there, but when I tried to submit that first 18-inch fish, it's like, sorry, you don't have signal, you can't submit. And I was like, well, so it was weird, but I ended up fishing or submitting when I got a little further north. My signal came back, and so I was like, well, there's enough places on this river that people might not have signal. Maybe then you have people that just sandbag and don't upload their fish until the very end anyway. Which to each their own. I usually upload when I can, but so I was really guessing that was not going to hold up. That I had 81 and change, I think, and the next closest person was like half an inch, 3/4 of an inch behind me for second place. So I was like, any one of those guys, if anybody picked up a kicker, first through fifth could have passed me. But
right.
So I
just like you did, just like when you picked up that fish, you leapfrogged.
I had quite a few guys that said, hey, were you sandbagging? I was like, absolutely not. I said I caught that big one with 20 minutes to go, and uploaded it as soon as I had it, because they're like, yeah, I looked, and you weren't even in the top 5, and I was like, I know, I jumped from sixth to first just with that one fish, and so I got off the water. Helped another gentleman get his kayak loaded up, and I was like, well, I got to go head to the wards and set up my table and everything. And got down there, set everything up. It was like 2:45. I looked and I was still in the lead, and 3 o'clock came and went, and that was all she wrote. I nobody. I was the only one that found that big kicker. That also got me big bass for the tournament. There was one other guy who did catch a 19 and three quarters as well, but he did not pay big bass. So I got to keep big bass all to myself. I would have been happy to split that with him, and but I was like, man, that's that. If I could offer any advice to tournament anglers, as long as it's not crazy, pay big bass because you never
Yeah.
know. It I'd come close last year at our Juniata event. I caught my PB Smalley, a 21 inch, and I thought for sure that day that I had big bass. And actually, the guy who ran our tournaments last year, Mike Reinhold, pulled in right behind me, and I was like, "Hey, I got big bass, I think." He's like, "Nope, 21 and a half." I was like, "Oh, come on!" I don't think I saw a 21 and anything over 21 all year in all of our tournaments, and the one day I catch a 21, he caught a 21 and a half. But
Yeah.
I was still psyched about that because that 21-inch Smalley is still my PB. Even yeah, I don't have my biggest largemouth is only 20 and a half. So
I know
I
that
was
feeling, man. I know that feeling. I had that kind of day this June in a tournament here in West Virginia. I caught a 19.5 smallmouth out of the Taggart River. It's just about an hour and a half south of the Pennsylvania line. And my buddy, who was a turnip director like you, was fishing the lake. And the lake is infamous for being a pleasure lake. It holds nice fish, but you get run over by the boats after like 9 a.m. When he was out and he was grading fish while he was out fishing, and he just threw a Senko out and let it float to the bottom. He said it was probably out there 5 to 10 minutes. And he was grading fish, and his pole went, and then it dove, and he's like, he grabbed it, and said it was already on, and he reeled it in. It was a 20 and a half inch smallmouth, and I'm like, well, thanks, but he was gracious. Winter, he took me out to dinner afterwards, and so I didn't have to pay for dinner. He used his big bass money.
nice. Well, and that the very first tournament this year, I didn't realize that they said that I didn't have to grade fish on the water. So that first tournament, I was doing the same thing, and um, I actually, did okay. I think I finished seventh in that tournament, even with, uh,
Out
grading
there sitting out
fish.
there grading fish.
Yeah, and eventually, all the other tournaments this year, we have a gal who was grading for us off site, like so. I didn't even have to worry about that for the last couple tournaments. So I'm super thankful for her, and she did a great job. So um, that took a load off my plate when she said that she would do that for us. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the story, and I'll take it as my first official win. So
Outstanding. So the Bass Fishing for Noobs host is a tournament winner.
correct. Yep. So and now, I mean, I'm kind of curious. Had I been able to fish, that was our fourth event. We have our fifth and final event next Saturday, joint event on that same stretch of river where I caught the 21 and a half last year. So I'm excited for that, but I'm just curious. I end up with my mom passing away. I missed um, two of our tournaments and I'm like, man, if I would have fished those, I could have a shot at AOI because our AOI is really close because we've had almost a different winner every week, and like I know AOI just flip flopped with this last tournament too, um, so it just I'm curious now if I had fished those other two events where I would be in those standings, but you never know. I mean, I certainly had my fair share of much lower placings in tournaments, so there's no guarantee. But it gets me excited for just I only fished in this trail series the last 2 years, so
Well,
it gets
you get to throw away one tournament, right? It's the
correct. Yep,
best 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 6.
yep, yep. And normally I try and fish every event,
Right.
but especially now that I'm directing because I have to be there anyway. So for the most part, I try and fish it now. Like this year with my mom passing away, that definitely was a little bit of an extenuating circumstance. I still did the captain's meetings and stuff, but I did miss our second and third events of the year. So, um, but yeah, I'm excited to see what how it ends, and then also to see, how next year goes. Because I mean, I've improved so much this year over last year, and so hopefully the only way to go is up, and I keep improving, and we'll see how it goes.
Well, that's one thing that we always can do is we can take a look at what we've done from year to year and set goals for where you want to be at next year, whether it's
Yep.
finishing in the top 15% of your club or uh, top 15 at every event with a 50 anglers. It's you always can set goals. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I usually try and set a couple different goals every year, and I'll pick a technique or two that I really want to stick to and learn, and you know but tournament wise, I never really took it super seriously. I more went out for the camaraderie and everything,
yeah,
like that. But it's funny. I was just having that conversation yesterday. So somebody had reached out and said, "Hey, congrats on the win. Good guys don't always finish last," and it made me laugh. And I was like, I told him, I was like, I don't mind the last place finishes because I go out more for the fun of it than anything. But I got to say, it is nice to walk away with a win. So every once in a while, I'll take it if that's how it plays out. So
well, I agree with your concept and what and the way you feel about what you're doing when you go out, because if you go out with that mindset that just being out with friends and people that love the sport like you, then it is a win. Um, and then if you do actually do well and maybe collect a check or some hardware a, or a nice big bass prize, then it's just icing on the cake.
oh, absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing. I don't have that competitive streak in me, and some guys do. And man, I think if I had that, I would get so strung out at tournaments, just worrying about. Yeah, that's why usually I don't even look at the standings until late in the day, and more of it is just more looking to see how my friends are doing, or
Right.
to see how the judge is doing, make sure that all the fish are getting judged correctly and everything. It's rarely to see where I'm at, but uh, that's just the way I go at it because again, it's that's just not my what drives me to compete in these. It's more it's for me it's learning new waters. It forces me to fish away from my comfort zone. And as the Susquehanna is such a huge river, and we have tournaments that are 2.5 hours away from where I fish. And if it wouldn't be for fishing in those tournaments, I would never make that drive when I can drive
Yeah.
15 minutes and fish the water right by my house. But it is the Susquehanna is such a huge river, and it's a different river all those places. Like there's places north of Harrisburg, an hour and a half north of me, where the ledges run perpendicular or parallel to the river. They run downriver, whereas the ledges by me run perpendicular. So
Right.
it fishes completely different. And then there's the spots where it's almost more of a lake. South of me, they call it Lake Clark. It's still the Susquehanna River, but it's 15, 20 feet deep, and that's I usually don't fish that area because it's boat traffic because the boats don't have to worry about the rocks and stuff down there. So it's jet skis and people towing skiers and all sorts of boat traffic. Plus, it's deeper, and deeping or offshore stuff isn't my specialty at all. I do better when I know where the bottom is and can feel it with some regularity. But that's not to say that's just how the Susquehanna is. There's so many different places you can fish that fish completely different from other places. So it gets me, that competing in this tournament series just gets me to visit those different places that normally I wouldn't try to. And then we have a few lakes and stuff too that we do as part of that tournament series. So um,
Yeah, I
that
know. I years ago I used to make my trips up to Pennsylvania and fish pine tuning over on the Ohio border with Kappa, and they had the battle of the border with West Virginia,
Yep.
Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and I would
Yep.
go up for those. Great time, great events. Haven't been to the past. Haven't been up to one in about 4 or 5 years. Uh, but I do make my trips up there when I go up to Lake Erie for a week during the Memorial Weekend. Um,
Gotcha.
so it
I
ain't
I
nothing
do
like
every once
smallmouth
in a
fishing.
while. I
Ain't,
do run
ain't,
into your West Virginia guys every once in a while. I first met Tim Isaacs at my local tackle shop
yep.
last year. He was up to fish the Hobie event that I fished, and I ran into him at our local tackle shop and didn't even realize he was an out of state guy until I saw him last year at the paddle and fin thing at Dale Hollow, and he's like, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a West Virginia guy." I was like, "Oh wow, I thought you were a local," because I saw him
Hey,
at my local shop, and he's like, "No, no,
yeah. Tim lives about 20 minutes from me.
gotcha, okay,
He's right down the road. But
cool, yeah,
yeah, I say he'll be up. I wouldn't surprise me one bit if he's not up there in first week of October. I know
yeah,
some of the guys here from West Virginia have been hitting me up real hard. They've already got a house rented for the bass tournament there on the Susquehanna, and they're like, "Hey, $161, man. It's all we need from you. Come on, let's go." And I'm like, "Man, I'm tempted, but I don't. Right now, I have to say no." So, but I know Jody Queen will be up there.
yeah,
He had plans, so you'll have a couple guys, Jerry Spradlin, Kyle Struther, guys over toward the eastern part of western part of West Virginia, making that 6 hour drive up that way. So
gotcha. And then I know, yeah, Jody usually doesn't skip a Susquehanna event. I was almost tempted to try it this year because I did, do competed in the Hobie last year. I did terrible. I think I was like 150th out of 180. And I was like, this is my home river. I should do better than that. But I also fished places I didn't know.
right,
So it was a learning experience for me too. But it was cool just to say I fished with, some of those names and I got to meet a ton of people. It was worth it almost for the networking just
yeah,
just saying, hey, Sean from Paddle and Fin, I've interviewed before. Oh yeah, and get to meet people that I've talked to, doing this podcast in person was very cool. So that was almost worth the price of admission alone. Plus, just to say, hey, yeah, I competed in a Hobie BOS, and
and honestly, it's good for us to get out like that because people need to realize that we put our money where our mouth is. We're not just people that like to talk about fishing. We fish. We get out and fish, and it's
yeah,
great that you have Susie up there smacking the folks around up in Wisconsin and Illinois winning money, and Brian's out all the time. You got Jay out in Tennessee. Look at what Dustin's doing on the
Dustin. I was just
redfish.
gonna say,
My
Dustin, man.
gosh,
Oh my
he's
goodness.
he's killing it with the redfish, and even doing well when he fishes bass tournaments. So
I know he's a double threat, man. He
yes, he is.
he
We've
is a
got
heck
great
of a hammer.
we've got great people here with this network who are fishermen, and it's really proud to be a part of this group and work with you guys. So
Well, yeah, it's awesome having you. And you're right. I think it just shows our passion for, what we talk about. And it's that genuineness that draws people. I think,
yeah,
they can tell. And,
relate. They can
yeah,
relate.
absolutely. And if seeing someone like me who still considers himself a noob to some aspect, that I can jump in and try a Hobie BOS, if that gets somebody else to say, hey, if he can do it, I can definitely do it.
Oh
That's
yeah,
more power to them, and that makes me happy that, somebody can follow in my footsteps and, probably hopefully do better than I did. But so,
hey, one thing about this show is that it provides so much insight that if somebody sits down and watches you and Susie weekly, they're going to learn stuff that they can throw in their this tackle box, and apply it when the time comes. I mean, that's one of the great things about fishing content is that you can absorb what you want to take with you, what you think might work with your style and your technique, but in everything else you can pitch it out. Say, well, I don't. That's not my style. I'm not going to use that. But it's still there. It's still there, and you still have access to it. You still know it. And if you're in a situation where, like me, I hate fishing deep water, and I live right here next to the deepest lake in West Virginia. You know, I can walk down from my house here in 3 minutes and be on Summersville Lake, and you've got water that goes 400 feet deep.
Wow.
Most of your fishing is between 20 and 40 feet in the summertime. You know,
Okay.
so I'm terrible at it. Terrible. I want what you have up there, Lake Erie, what you have at the Susquehanna, and that's why I go to the New River a lot. I want that between 5 to 8 feet, ledges, swift water, moving water, where I can throw that Ned rig, throw that that square bill I love throw. I got a golden square bill that I just throw all year round, and uh, and use those type of techniques. Catch fish? Yeah, I do. I might not catch big fish, but I catch a lot of fish.
Yep. Yep. And I hear you. And that, I mean, that's the reason I started doing this show in the first place. When Ryan started the Bass Fishing for Noobs, I had hopped on almost right away, and started following him. And I probably listened for 3/4 of a year to him do the show by himself before I reached out and I was like, hey, most of the other shows on Paddle and Fin have a co-host, and yours is one of the few that don't. Have you ever thought about it? And he's like, I actually was just thinking about it, and if you'd like to come on, I'll let's talk about it, and I'll let you talk to Brian, and the rest is history. I looked back the other day, and I think I'm at least 100 shows recorded, and if you most of our shows are an hour, so
Yeah,
I look back at the amount of information that I've been given just doing this show, talking to the best people in our industry, the people who cash big checks with regularity, like Russ Snyders and Jody Queen and all these huge names. And you can't help but pick up something. And I know it's made me a better angler.
right.
So my only hope is that, the listeners who tune in, that same thing is happening to them. And I love hearing the stories from people who tell me, oh, I listened to that show, and I remember what Russ said, and I went out and tried it, and sure enough, I caught a PB, or it helped me, finally catch a check in our local trail series. So that's what keeps me coming back and doing this week in and week out. And 100 plus shows in, that's why we do what we do.
That's awesome, man. That's a lot of shows.
Yeah.
People think that's you figure you do between 35 and 50 shows a year. You know,
Yeah. Well, and
so
then, yeah, so like if you just think about the amount of information that's available from Paddle and Fin alone, I mean, in our, what, 5 plus years of how many different
yeah,
shows, the you could listen to from start to finish to all our shows, and it would probably take you a year to get through if you listen back to back to all of our and the amount of information that we put out on different things. It's kind of mind-boggling at this point.
what are we at? Like we're at like 260 now, aren't we, for the year?
Yeah,
Somewhere in the
something crazy.
mid twos. Um, you know, we, when we were down at ICAST looking pass out information, we were like, if somebody comes on with us, when you do a year worth of sponsorship, we pretty much promise them 300 shows. You know,
And
that's
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 probably a low. Yeah.
yeah, that's impressive, and that's not on top of we take that Christmas break off from like December 10th to January 5th or whatever.
Right.
So a show a day that we do with our 10 hosts, 11 hosts that we have, the 12 shows that we produce. Um, Granted, not every show comes up every day or every week. Your show's pretty regular. My show's regular. We got Brian, the OG show, but some of the other shows, that they may be sporadic, but they're there and they get out and they put out great content. Really looking forward, man, to what we're doing, what we've got coming up, because I think that our viewers out there will see that the Paddle and Fin Podcast Network is expanding, it's growing, and it's going to be season 7 is going to be pretty interesting.
it seems like crazy when you think of anything that lasts that long anymore, But that just tells you that what we put into it, and that there's a heart for it behind it, and uh, folks come and go, and we wish them all the best, and but we've kept at it, and it's not always easy. I don't know about you, but there's definitely weeks where I'm like, oh man, I got to record again, and but then what happens is, just like tonight, I'll come on and have an awesome conversation, and I'm like, man, what the heck was I dreading this for? This is amazing.
Well, I know exactly what you mean, because I do my shows on Tuesdays, and like it's Sunday now, and I haven't even given any thought of what I'm going to do on Tuesday. And I'm like, well, I got to start sitting down and just think of something. And I keep thinking about doing something for fall fishing, because we're coming up on the end of summer, and and we were talking about it pre-show, that so I'm gonna do a little research. And that's probably what I'll touch on Tuesday night. Um, soon as and I'll start doing my shows live again here real soon, because where I'm down here in this bowl with mountains and trees around me, I can't get good signal until the leaves fall off the tree.
Right,
So
right.
and
Didn't you
I don't
used
feel
to
like
you were doing that at a bar or something
I
for a long
was.
time?
Now that I got my man cave all set up down here, I'm
That
like,
looks nice. Yeah.
I've got it all. Well, it needs really finished up and organized, but you can't see on the other side of the monitors here with all my tools. but yeah, I did pack up the laptop, and I go up top of the hill to the bar with my hotspot. And now that it's just so much nicer not have to travel around and do that when you can do it here. And now that I've switched software packages, I'm streaming with you guys here on StreamYard.
StreamYard. Yep.
It helps too, because I've uploaded everything. I've got all my videos, just like our intro that we do and stuff,
Hmm.
up there where I can just kick it and go.
It does make it a lot easier. But
Yeah. So
but yeah,
so
I know exactly what you're saying. So
no, and I appreciate you inviting me. And it's too bad that Randy had to take off on us this evening. I'd been love to be able to pick his brain, because
yeah,
we all
because
know.
I don't think he's been on the Noob Show yet. So we usually try and have all the new hosts on at least once when they first come on, and I'll have to reach out or extend another invitation to him, because I don't think he's
Yeah,
been on our show yet.
you should pin him up for next weekend, since he bailed on us.
You
No
hear that,
excuse,
Randy? If you're
Randy.
listening, yeah,
No,
we'll get you. We'll
no
get you.
excuse. No,
I actually,
no excuse.
I think I have a guide on the Susquehanna lined up for next week. So for anybody
Beautiful.
who's listening, I talked to him a ton. He just he was actually hosting Josh Shrenko from the Smalley Talk podcast this week. So him and his dad came back to Pennsylvania to fish the Susquehanna, and so the guy I'm going to interview was taking them out. So that's why he couldn't come on this weekend, but he said
Yeah,
next week he should be good. So
you might want to get your ad design and put up for next week's show, and post it on the Bass page, because all them guys coming up for the end.
oh yeah,
You'll
oh
have
yeah.
35 or 40 viewers watching that show.
That's not a bad idea. I will have to do that. So, um, well, yeah, well, I'll get him lined up. So, guys, tune in for that next week. Look forward to that. Should be a good show. This guy is just this year completed Smalley games twice. So that
Holy
just
mackerel.
tells you the amount of smallmouth, big smallmouth that he catches.
So
He's a
yeah, you might tell people what that is, because there may be some viewers out there that might not know what Ashton does for that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So basically, what Smalley Games is, and I didn't do it this year. I did it last year, and it's a game that Smalley Talk podcast puts on. Josh Renko, the guy who runs Smalley Talk and Achigan brand, they do a kind of like a board. It's almost like a board game, and when you catch fish, I think this year it's 16 inches or bigger. Um, it counts as a game piece on that board, and you're basically competing or completing this board that from start to finish. There's different spots for different sizes, and this
What's
year
the
they also
company name again? How did you pronounce
Achigan,
that? Achigan?
Achigan,
Okay.
yeah. It's Achigan brand. They run it. I think if you, I'm trying to think of what the website is. I'll put it in the show notes for any folks who are interested. But you collect those game pieces as you catch fish. You submit it to that website, and you buy like a little sticker. Like last year, I love the stickers more than anything. Actually,
Yeah.
I actually taped them to my board so that I could have them and remove them because the stickers are really cool. But to complete the game just once takes quite a few. You can compete it with all, or actually, I don't know that you can this year. Last year, you could complete it all with 16-inch fish if you wanted to, but this year, I think there's special
Yeah,
spots
yeah,
for.
you had to have 18s, 19s, and 20s. Yeah.
Yeah. So they also did Smalley Snacks this year, which is a board piece where you have to catch it on a certain bait. Like they had a
Oh
rat
wow.
they had a rat Smalley snack where you had to catch it on a rat. They had a insect. It had to be some kind of insect lure. So they changed it up a little bit this year and made it interesting. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
glad I didn't have to do that because I've never caught a fish on a rat and I've thrown it about a billion times. So um,
I have, but not a smallmouth. You know, I mean, I've caught some largemouth with it. But
and I
I
actually
think, yeah, you've got me really. I'm gonna have to look that up for next year. I'm gonna really. We don't have the size of smallmouth like you guys do, but I do know I'll be either at St. Clair or back at Lake Erie next year for a week, and I'll bury that board up if I can.
well, I know that's one thing I'm still bummed about, and well, I have time yet, but I haven't caught a 20-inch either largie or smallie this year. And the last 3 years, I have caught at least a 20-inch or bigger smallmouth or largemouth, and this year I haven't found my 20-inch yet. I was close just yet or on Saturday with the 19 and 3/4, but here in Pennsylvania, you can submit that and get like a citation. I have a
Yeah,
couple of mine on the back wall there.
there you go.
Um, they give you a cool little patch and like just a cool paper that says you're
Like a
you
certificate
know
of achievement. Yeah.
yeah. So that is one of the goals that I have every year now is to catch at least one 20-inch fish, and I have not found my 20-inch fish this year. Now, last year I did. It was a little bit later in the fall when I caught the 21 and a half. So there's still hope, but I don't like to be cutting it this close. So
Well, I did achieve my personal best this year, but I have no proof other than a
oh yeah.
video.
Oh, you know what? I did see that, and
Cost
that's
me $1,400.
uh, I remember seeing that, and oh man, it made me think of that 21 and a half because I have a picture of it on the board, so I have proof, but I have no trophy shot because as I was holding it up, um, I had it gripped by the lip. I was like so amped up and shaking so bad he shook twice and I dropped him before I could get the trophy shot, and I was like, well, I guess the one on the board is going to have to do it.
Yeah.
It would have been cool to get a picture holding that one, but unfortunately, I don't know if I was just so amped up and he gave two good shakes and was gone. So
I'm still eats at me that I lost my phone in the water, and I didn't lose it. It was sprinkling, and I stuck my phone down in my jacket pocket, and then as I started paddling out, I must have bumped it right out into the water. As soon as I get out of the grass to get out there, I'm like, I gotta look at my pictures, and it was gone. I'm like, oh man! But luckily for me, as I used to do, now I've got my Insta 360 that I take everywhere with me. But I used to take my old iPhone and put it on my boat, and I record all my stuff. And I got that whole fish from cast to catch to in the boat to drop to going to the shore because I'm like, no, I'm not going to try to measure this thing out in the middle of the water. I'm going to the bank. And
mhm.
when I was at the bank, I was in grass, a big grass mat, about
Yep.
2.5, 3 feet of water. So I actually, that's one of the things I'm going to do here in November, December before it gets really, really cold. I'm going to go back out there and see if I can locate that phone after the grass dies off.
Well, yeah, it's quite possible it's still recoverable, like the pictures and stuff.
Well, I didn't have a cover on it, but
Okay.
what I will do is I'll send it off somewhere and see if somebody can take the little hard drive out and
Yep.
put it in another phone or put it on an SD drive or something.
Yeah.
So
You never know. It'd be worth it
yeah.
to at least have that picture. So
Hey, I appreciate you having me on tonight, bro.
yeah. Again, thanks for saving me. Again, running into Sunday night and I'm recording, but I'm happy to have you on and great catching up with you. Um, Guys, make sure you tune into the Rusty Hook podcast here on the Paddle and Fin. Tuesday nights, John puts
Yep.
on a great show,
Thank
has
you.
tons of guests and tons of good guests. And yeah, so tune in and check him out. We'll put the links to John's stuff in the show notes as well. And so make sure you tune in and check him out. And anything else you want to add, John? Any
No,
sponsors or
brother.
anything like that?
No, I
That's
appreciate it. It's a great show.
cool, man. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fan.
One, one thing, one last thing.
Go for it.
Congratulations again on your first win.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that, man. Yeah, definitely going to be riding that high for a little bit. So, all right, let's see if I can get through this now without stuttering. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Bass Fishing for Noobs here on the Paddle and Fin podcast, where we bring you the techniques, the tricks, and the tips to help you rip more lips. You guys have a good night.